Hey friends, welcome back to the Bald Booktuber. My name is Scott. Today we're going to go over the top 10 reasons I love to reread books, in particular the reasons that I love to reread fantasy books in series. So rereading has been a pretty major part of my reading diet. Most of my time as a reader, I reread The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings multiple times as a kid. When I discovered A Song of Ice and Fire in my 20s, I read that multiple times. So I wanted to sit down and sort of talk about why rereading is important to me and why I enjoy doing it so much. I know several people will say, well, there's too many books to get to already. I don't have time to do rereads, or why would I want to read something when I already know what happens, these types of things. And I can understand some of those counter arguments, but I'm here to tell you that there are at least 10 reasons that I love rereading, and let's talk about them right now. So number 10 for me is probably going to be higher on many people's lists when it comes to why they reread, and that's nostalgia. So I have recently been quite jealous because two of my good friends, Madison over at Madison Goodyear and Caitlin, who is a friend and subscriber to the channel, read through Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss. So they had never read Name of the Wind, they had never read Wise Man's Fear, and they ended up loving both books. And it took me back to when I discovered Name of the Wind back in my 20s. It just was something that was fresh at the time, told in a way that I hadn't seen before. And I still have a lot of love and nostalgia for that series. I am kicking myself because I didn't jump along and reread with them at the time. I have reread it at least once. I read the books paperback when they, close to when they came out, and I've listened to the audio for each of them at least a couple of times, and the audio is fantastic. Nick Podell, that's my boy. I want to do an immersive reread, and I keep putting it off because there's other stuff I want to get to more, but that is a story where there are all these mysteries to unwind. There's a lot of theorizing that goes into it. It's just a lot of fun. And nostalgia-wise, it's a series that brings me joy. So that's number 10, nostalgia. Number 9, I guess could be considered similar to nostalgia in some ways, but it's comfort. And by comfort, what I mean is I know what I'm getting in the story. I know what happens when. I am able to anticipate the big moments, and they pay off so well. And for me, my comfort read is, of course, A Song of Ice and Fire, my favorite series of all time. I'll be starting another reread here in a couple of days as I join that wonderful read-along with Joanna and Yolene and Joanna and Alex. I can't wait for those discussions. This is the type of series where no matter how many times I read it, it's like slipping on an old pair of shoes, and I'm always so happy to get back into that world. Last year, I reread both Fire and Blood and Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which is the bind-up of the Duncan Egg novellas, and it was so great being back in Westeros, and I can't wait to get started back up with my Game of Thrones reread. Number 8 is an interesting one. That's value. I buy too many books, and I buy them in too many formats, because I like to have the Kindle version and I like to have the Audible version so that I can immersively read. And there are some series where I have a lot of books, and I have them in multiple formats. But for me, the value portion of this and kind of the idea here is if I read the books multiple times, I feel better about having spent the money on them in the first place. So my series that best encompasses this is the Dresden Files by Jim Butcher. I have all of these on both Kindle and audio, and the audio is of course done by the magnificent James Marsters. I can just listen to those audiobooks any old time, and I don't always go in order. Sometimes I'll just throw on Changes, or sometimes I'll just throw on Cold Days just for the heck of it, just because I have it. It's fun to revisit those stories and to know that the money has been, if not well spent, at least spent, and I can address that and go over those again and again. All right, number 7 is slumps, and more accurately, avoiding them. So, I haven't been in a prolonged reading slump since the pandemic started. I was in one a little bit before that, where I would start a ton of new books, a ton of new series, and I wasn't finishing them. They just weren't gripping me. So, one of the ways that I avoid slumps, and I know other people have done this as well, is to revisit a favorite and to go back and reread it. And probably the series that best delivers on this for me is the Gentleman Bastard sequence by Scott Lynch. I can go back to Lies of Locke Lamora anytime, and it doesn't matter how I'm feeling. It doesn't matter whether I've been able to read other stuff or if I'm in the mood for other stuff or not. When I listen and read Lies of Locke Lamora, immediate slump busting. Done with it. I'm back, ready to go. It's the type of series where I can revisit it again and again and again and again, and it feels fresh every time, and I laugh every time. I love Locke and John, two of my favorite buddies in all of fiction. I just can revisit that, and it's a lot of fun. Number 6 is appreciation, and what I mean by this is I'm a bit of a prose snob, I guess you would say. I'm a bit of a beautiful language is enough for me. So I like to go back and reread passages and go back and look at quotes that I've highlighted and this kind of stuff. And this could easily apply, of course, to King Killer as well. Rothfuss is a beautiful writer. But for me, this is best encompassed by my favorite author, and that's Robin Hobb. Anytime I'm going back and rereading any of her work, and particularly I just reread Farseer, I just reread Live Ship, I will be reading Tawny Man here shortly. Anytime I go back and read that, it's so nice. On my Kindle, I have everything highlighted that was meaningful to me. I'll highlight new stuff as I go. It's just nice to sit back and appreciate a master craftsman at their craft. It's just wonderful. So that is number 6. Number 5 is comprehension, and sometimes it requires me to read once, twice, 3 times to get, I guess, the full benefit out of what the author was intending, getting subtext, getting these kinds of things. And I can already tell, just having read Shadow of the Torture, the first book of Book of the New Sun, that this is the type of story where I'm going to have to reread it for comprehension reasons. So I guess that would be my best example of this. Another example would be Dark Tower. I feel like I got a lot out of my first reading of The Dark Tower. I love that story, but I do think there was plenty that was missed. And by taking time to go back and reread it, there's going to be some of those things that I catch on rereads that I didn't get on my first read. So that is number 5. Number 4 is retention. I famously have an awful memory. And one of the reasons that I like to immersively read is that by both listening and reading, there's a better chance of me retaining the information. But even that, on a first read, there's a lot that just is gone. And so by rereading, there's a better chance that I'll pick up on some of the things that are minor details and things that are foreshadowing and this kind of thing. And really, I could put an example of any series here, but the one that I most think of is Stormlight Archive. Because there's a lot of tiny details and a lot of stuff that happens throughout the books that I will have forgotten by the time I get to my reread. I will be rereading it in time for book 5 when it comes out at the end of next year. So I'm looking forward to that reread because I know there's going to be a lot of stuff that is somewhere in here and I don't know where, and it'll help me retain and retrieve it. Number 3 is preparation, and this could be to prepare for, and often is to prepare for a new book coming out in a series. It could also be to prepare for if there's going to be a movie or TV show adaptation coming out for a book that I love. By taking the time to go back through and see what's being set up and see where things were left off with various characters and arcs and these kinds of things, it gives a better, at least for me, appreciation of the new material that I am consuming at that point in time. So for me, the best example of this is the First Law series. Joe came out with The Wisdom of Crowds, which was book 3 of the Age of Madness. back in 2021. And I listened back through every single one of the preceding books leading up to that. I got to spend some time with my boy, Stephen Pacey, the greatest audiobook narrator of all time, and telling me a story that I love. And by going back through that, I felt a lot more ready to appreciate Wisdom of Crowds, which ultimately is my favorite in the whole First Law series. So, and I think part of that is because I took that time to re-experience the other stuff before going into Wisdom of Crowds. Number 2 is context, and what I mean by this one is oftentimes earlier in a series, events will happen or people will say things or these types of things that I don't have context for on a first read. But after I have read later books in the series, I can revisit, go back to the beginning, and some of that stuff makes a lot more sense. Some of it is foreshadowing, some of it is decisions that characters make that don't 100% make sense at the time because I don't maybe understand their motivations or I don't understand what they're putting in place and why they're doing what they're doing. And by reading throughout the entirety of a series and then going back and reading for that context, it just makes things a lot more enjoyable for me. So my best example of this is Sun Eater. This could certainly have fallen under preparation as well. But when I went back and did my reread in 2022 in preparation for Kingdoms of Death and Ashes of Man coming out, having had the full context of 3 books up to that point, Empire of Silence was just almost an entirely new experience. There were things that I understood and things that delivered for me on Hadrian's Tale that I didn't even recognize the first time around because I had additional context. So this is something I would highly encourage for you rereaders out there. Read for additional context after you know the full story up to that point. And then finally, number 1 is what I call evolution. Ultimately, the words don't change. What the author lays down, that is set, that is fixed, outside of if there are aftermarket edits or these kinds of things. But ultimately, the story itself is set and it's fixed. But what does change is me over time. So I'm not the same person that I was when I read Lord of the Rings the first time around. I'm a much different person. So every time I do a reread of Lord of the Rings, or anything else for that matter, I'm seeing it almost with new eyes, new experiences, new context for me, not necessarily context for the story itself. So probably the reason why this is number 1 to me is that my reading taste has changed so much over the years and will continue to do so as I read more and I read more widely and that kind of stuff. So by having those additional experiences, by having additional things that I've read, that kind of thing, I get more out of those rereads. So encourage you to look at doing the same. So those were my 10. This was kind of a quick one. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, I would appreciate the likes, subscribes, hit the bell notification, comment. What are your thoughts on rereading? What are your favorite books to reread? That sort of thing. But until next time, as always, publication order always, my friends.